Hello everyone, welcome to our fifth video lecture for community organizing, and in this video we'll talk about planning and organizing in community development. So for this session we will be talking about the different types of planning that we do in community development, and then what are the different stages of planning and organizing, and then what are the different types of implementation that we do for the plans that we make in a particular community, and how is management in community organizing different from your usual traditional corporate and bureaucratic organizations. So McKnight points out that there are four types of planning that can be done in a particular community based on the particular need or the particular practitioner or stakeholders working in a particular community. Also, this is also based on what type of or what approach of community organizing you're doing, if it's place-based, if it's mutual aid, or if it's social enterprise or social innovation. There are different types of planning that is best fit in a particular program, project, or community organizing approach. And these four are relational planning, traditional planning, advocacy and equity planning, and participatory research and planning. And we're going to be talking about them in detail in the next few slides. Okay, so let's go first with relational planning. So basically, when you look at context clues, relational planning is really heavily geared towards improving relationships in the community, thinking about relationship building, and improving relationships and dynamics of relationship between and among community members, quasi-groups, primary groups, and informal associations as important in terms of achieving community goals. And this is very important in any type of community organizing endeavor. So the goal of relational planning is to increase quality of life through increased trust and caring. So it means that when there's increased solidarity and harmony within the community, it's going to be easier for us to be able to, or for them to be able to move towards their goal. And so the basic assumption here is that strong caring relationship in communities build strong communities. And when the community is strong, it is easier for them to be able to cope against external or internal pressures and become more resilient. And probably when you think about this from the lens of, let's say, disaster risk reduction management in a particular community, it's very important that you have a community that's tightly knit, that they have trust among each others, in the neighbors. They know who to go to for a particular expertise, and this person is willingly and generous enough to be able to give their talents and resources to those in need. And that's very important when there is a problem arising in a community, just like a disaster. Right? And we've seen how good relationships, particularly in times of disaster, when there are hazards that are present, the risk for disaster decreases when the community is able to help each other, have a sort of bayanihan, community links. And this is something that even countries outside the Philippines, who are less disaster prone but have more technological advances in terms of disaster risk reduction, kind of look at with wonder and with high regards and respect, because the Philippines, even though we're so disaster prone, even if we don't have advanced technical expertise and resources related to disaster risk, we still are able to be resilient as a people. It's really because of resilient relationship, solidarity among community people caring for one another. And so so that's one example of how a particular community is able to become better because of trust and solidarity and harmony. And so the usual focal system here is because, you talk about relationships, talk about trust, you talk about mutual aid, you talk about solidarity. So it's usually place-based organization. And we talk about people here, communities that are in geographic proximity with each other. So basically, the change strategy that we want, how do we want our community to improve is to be able to work together to improve present and future quality of life. So it's really working together, building relationships, etc. And so the approach here really is, intuitive. It's very effective and it's really socially oriented, because again, we want to build relationship among people. And so the one of the tactics, a main tactic that we use for relation planning is talking through, talking through with people, conversing with people, connecting people together, building trust and relationship and solidarity among the people, mitigating conflicts if there are certain conflicts that are present, in facilitative ways, and the practitioner who visits the community or is in the community should be warm, should be caring, should be a person who has good relationship building skills, who is able to help foster trust among people. And basically the type of power that is exuding in this particular type of planning, so you always have to talk about power, somebody has to influence. It's the soul type of relationship, so we kind of, we build intuitive relationship with people because again, it's trust that we know that in times of need there are going to be people who are going to be helping us, and therefore that increases quality of life. And so we sort of have a common vision towards what makes a good community, and then we work together. So that's basically what the main tenets of relational planning is. Next, we have your traditional planning. And, we don't really have to look forward. I know that you've had, exposures in different, organizational, bureaucratic, and scientific management styles of planning. And this is just that. This is planning in the most scientific sense of the word that we use in formal organizations. And so sometimes we use that type of planning, a little bit bureaucratic, scientific management, in communities, particularly when it is an agency that is bureaucratic, that gives or that provides services to the community, or the community is part of the bureaucratic system of that particular organization. And the best example would be the government. Siyempre, if we talk about barangays as a community, the barangay is within the bureaucratic, aspect or system of the government, particularly in the local level. And so when, government actors provide community development activities, rural, urban development activities to their communities, they're acting within a formal organization. And therefore, the type of planning that you're using is the scientific type of planning that follows policies, legal, formal norms. Right? So, and then of course, this varies from one government to the next. But of course, in the Philippines, we have, common expressions of how governments are being run, particularly because we have mandates, policies, and legal policies in relation to this. No? So we can still use a traditional scientific management perspective in planning in communities, particularly if the main actor is coming from a bureaucratic organization. And the most common example is governmental organization, particularly your local government units. And so the focal system here are the traditional system of government. So when you talk about what is your focal community, it's usually your barangay, because the barangay is a bureaucratic geopolitical unit, that is governed by another, by a larger bureaucratic organizational formal organization that is political, governmental in nature. And so we talk about legal geopolitical entities as our focal communities. So examples would be your barangays. So what is your change strategies? Of course, we're going to use the long-term planning, the visioning that comes with the usual scientific management. And also you have to look at the books and the norms and the policies, the mandates of local chief executives, no, in a particular. So if it's barangay, barangay captain or the barangay council, what are the mandates of the barangay captain and the barangay council? That is how they kind of, see, do their plans. Now, what is the scope of their power? What is the scope of their work? And that's how they're going to draw influence and, do planning, no? Policy formulation and implementation, and again, bureaucracy. So of course there will be letters, there will be approvals from one step to the next. You have to do, and of course if you're talking about higher level governments, like for example local government units like cities, municipalities, then when you access resources, whether that's human resource, there are a lot of approvals that has to be done, etc., etc. And then of course you have to work within a scope of mandates that you have based on the codified norms that is provided to you based on your position. So that's your basic change strategy. And so the approach here usually for governmental actors in providing community development interventions is that, so we are assuming that these people, they really like they are there to lead, no? So they have political will, they have political and legal affordances in their hands, but they don't necessarily have the expertise. Like for example, a mayor or a barangay captain may notice that the community has high malnutrition rates, but this particular barangay captain or this mayor is not necessarily a doctor, a pediatrician, or a nutritionist, or a public health specialist. And so basically, in order to develop the community and solve that problem of increased malnutrition in that particular area, is to seek the help of professionals who know. And so they tap the academic people, they tap the people working in hospitals, in public health. And, these people sit in the table in terms of the planning and, developing interventions for the community in terms of decision making. Of course, in governments, the idea really, or the ideal, or the normative really is to still solicit ideas and suggestions from people in a democratic way, but more often than not in a traditional planning setup, particularly in this, high stakes, codified, legal pathways that these plannings are done, because it's very cumbersome. Usually, it's not the decision making is not bi-directional in a traditional planning mode. And so the tactics here is, unlike the relational planning wherein you are intuitive, you use the affect, the emotions, and relationships of people. Here it's really more of rational, this is the problem, how much we count the economic costs and financial costs in solving that problem. We get the best we plan, or we create the best programs and projects based on evidence and based on previous knowledge in relation to that particular intervention, and how communities similar to the community of interest have reacted or have responded or have improved based on that intervention. And then we apply that intervention, and then we use monitoring tools, usually very quantitative, in looking at how things work. It's very technical, and it's really based on the engagement and recommendations of an expert in order to do a social intervention in a community. And so the practitioner role, or who is the practitioner in this community development, as I mentioned, these are those coming from the agencies in the government. So this may be someone from DSWD or DILG, or it could be those coming from the Environmental Bureau, based again from the need of the, or it could be directly from the barangay council or the barangay captain, but it's based on the need who is acting. So the type of power, as I mentioned, it's very vertical. It's very top down. and it's unilateral. Of course, governments could do more in terms of making this process more participatory, but again, most of their legal mandates do not really require them to be participatory. It is encouraged, but it's not required. So it is really based on the political will of a particular leader, whether or not that the spirit of participation is added into the bureaucratic nature of governance in public governance, right? And so again, it also power comes from rationality and knowledge, expertise. Next is advocacy or equity planning, and then this is very much connected to planning, relation to advocacy, and making sure that people are held accountable and the problems of communities are made aware. So again, advocacy planning is to ensure that in disempowered groups, in the book they call it powerless. I do not like to use the word powerless because to say that they're powerless, it means that that's their essential trait. But usually people lack the sense of power because they are disempowered. There are external causes that makes them powerless. So I would like to say disempowered. So to ensure that disempowered groups have a voice in long-range planning. Particularly in the traditional planning, so they have to be engaged. And so when a practitioner or a community development practitioner would want to engage people in the traditional planning in the public sphere, then these people would really have to advocate for them, and really have to produce means so that these people can be heard, or the causes of these people can be considered in a given set, or in the agenda of the government, or the other duty bearers. So the focus system here is the target group who are affected by injustices. So usually it's identified by the advocate. So this could be place-based organizing, particularly if if the location or the community itself is the reason why they are experiencing inequality. But this can also be communities that of a certain category, like LGBTQ plus people, like women, people with disabilities, or religious minorities, or IPs that may not necessarily be in a particular geopolitical location, but they have to be integrated or mainstreamed into the general development planning. So the basic change strategy here, so if they're disempowered, they have to be empowered. So one way of empowering them is to, again, capacitate them, and also seeking accountability through social action tactics. We'll talk about how social action tactics work later. And the approach is research and educational strategies to conscientize regarding power imbalances and influence political will. So again, people know their problems, but people may not be aware of the opportunities that they can have if the barriers, of the structural barriers that they are experiencing, like lack of access to education, or lack of social assistance, or discrimination and stigma, could increase their opportunities. And so that's the meaning of conscientizing them. It is through a reflection of experiences and trying to find the root causes of a person's demise. May be able to, that would be the first step of empowering people. We'll talk about empowerment in another lecture, but yeah, so we have to empower them, and again seek accountability, or demand accountability from those who are duty bound to care for them in an equitable way. So, it's very important to conscientize them and influence political will of those who have a better hand in traditional planning. So, traditional planning is, done by people based on their legal mandates. Some of the legal pathways do not necessarily engage in participation. When you do advocacy planning, you make sure and you advocate for people who are disenfranchised, disempowered to be engaged in that process of mainstream development planning that is usually traditional, making sure that they participate or at least their concerns are placed into the social interventions or the solutions being proposed. And again, related to conscientizing is, increasing their awareness and removing them from false consciousness, false consciousness that make them say that things are, this state of life is okay. We make them realize that, the government or duty bearers are accountable for a better life and that they should not be going on a day-to-day survival, and that their personality or their identity should not be the reason why they are getting less in life compared to other people deemed acceptable by society. And that kind of can ignite a spark, for disenfranchised people to be able to be capacitated, increase their willingness to train and capacitate themselves and, get their voices be heard with the facilitation of the practitioners. And so, usually the practitioner here are expert or volunteer advocates who wishes to help a disenfranchised community or group. So, ito na yung mga civil society organizations with their particular mission. So, you have World Vision, you have USAID, you have UNDP, and you have specific CSOs that are, based in the Philippines as well with their particular nuances, like probably have Love Yourself, that's particularly looking at HIV, right, and sexual transmitted infections, and then you have professional organizations that also have something to do with community organizing and development. So, usually they are the ones who do advocacy. This is good, but one pitfall of advocacy planning is that, again, it can still be a bit vertical because the one identifying the problems for the people is still the expert or the advocate or the one volunteering, which can again limit the potentials of the community people to be empowered. And so, the type of power that we want to gain for the community people is that we want to aim for equality, fair treatment, and then we are also very sensitive to the political nature of power that have disenfranchised them, in the first place. And so, again, that's why we are demanding for accountability. Next, we have participatory planning, and this is the type of planning that goes with the community organizing phases, which discussed 2 episodes ago, and then also community-based participatory action research, which we also discussed a session ago. So the goal here is to solve problems through active engagement from those affected. So you're not coming in as an expert, whether you're an advocate or you are someone from the government or you are someone who's really good at building relationships. You're coming in as someone who wants to help but still wants to give the upper hand or give the efficacious aspect of planning and organizing to the people, which is again very difficult to distinguish. How does an advocate fully become at the same par with the people who is usually deemed as persons who are victims of false consciousness. And it is an art, and you really have to immerse for a very long time so that you can experience being one with them, so that you'll know how exactly to mobilize them in such a way that they are the ones leading the charge, just like what we learned in CO and CB PAR. So the focal system is defined by the people who are affected by them. So in a community, they define whether the focal system is the whole of the community, or if they're just going to focus on children because there's increased malnourishment, or they want to just focus on women, because there is a disenfranchisement of women in the community, etc., etc. But again, the focal community or the focal point or system that is being looked at is defined again by the problems identified by the community themselves after the assessment portion of the CB-PAR is done. So the basic change strategy here is that participants control the process and are engaged in the whole community-based participatory action research process and community organizing, and we have discussed this in the last 2 sessions. The approach here is that the information that they gathered and consolidated are interpreted by the participants themselves. They get to identify the problems. They get to also co-create the solutions. And your goal there again is facilitative. And so the tactics here is that participants share results and identify the strategies on their own, or just a little bit of facilitation from the practitioner. And the practitioner role here is that they identify themselves as an equal participant in the process. They are not leading the charge. They are not leading the planning session. They just capacitate, the particular person to, how do you hold a meeting? How do you write a letter in a way that's okay? If that is what makes them disempowered, then you give them those technical support. But in terms of decision making, it has to be really led by the people in the community. And so the type of power comes from solidarity, from participation. It comes from productivity in the community. Meaning people are productive. They are not just feeling people. They're not just thinking people, but they're also doing people. And to address their particular issues in the community to improve their quality of life. And just like your approaches, this can be mixed and matched based on a particular, project that you're making. Probably you're making a project that, is coming from the government, but you also want to make it participatory in a way, in terms of, how does that particular project would look like on the ground. And so you kind of get, you can mix them and match them with a little bit of advocacy planning and improving your relationships, So these do not stand on their own. If the projects are locally led, then maybe you're gearing towards relational or participatory. And that is what we want, a locally led project. But there are projects in the community that, has to be professionally led. Like, for example, malnutrition, addressing malnutrition or addressing high levels of diseases in the community, or if the community has structural problems, or in terms of, being earthquake prone, or they are tsunami prone, So sometimes you also have to, seek the help of professionals because there might not be having human resources. You might not be having human resources or intellectual resources in the community in relation to that. If you want to be able to, if generally there is harmony already in the community, then we go with the relational or in the traditional sense. But if there is conflict, or when you say not really conflict like away, but it's really more of there's increased inequality in the community, then we gear towards, moving to the participatory and advocacy. So this is kind of, so this is the situation of the community, whether there's, generally solidarity or there's increased political tensions, or if the project is locally led and professionals. But again, you can go through the quadrants and mix and match the quadrants based on what you think would be perfect or would be best to address the nuances of the focal system in question. And so these are the different stages of planning across. Even if you have relational planning, you should have these steps, or you should have steps similar to this, because again, these stages are very scientific. I will not be going to them in deep detail because I know that you've had scientific management in your previous classes. But to remind you, we have the visioning, or setting up a vision, wherein it's an informal process of asking, what do we need to improve to this situation? How do we want to see ourselves in the next 3 to 5 years. So what's the vision of the community. What does quality of life in the community mean for the community people. Next, we have a mission statement, and mission statement is the consensual creation of a short, particularly 1 or 2 paragraphs maximum, of a clear statement of what the community wants to accomplish in order to get to that particular vision. So for example, you want a disaster resilient community. So what would be your mission statement? So probably one would be, to be able to capacitate the people on how they can prevent their vulnerability towards earthquakes or tsunamis, right? And then probably a second mission would be to be able to develop procedures in the community before, during, and after a particular hazard, whether that's earthquake or. So again, the vision is a disaster resilient community. So how do you get to that? You capacitate people, and you set up procedures that are codified, articulated. And then you have to define the outcome objective. So if your goal is to capacitate, then your outcome objectives would be, they should have certain scores for knowledge. They should be able to do return demonstration, and they have to conduct earthquake drills or tsunami drills in a normal fashion. So these are things that probably you can. These are what you can kind of count eventually. So what do you want to achieve? So you want to achieve programmatic capacitation. Let's say 75% of the community has undergone, let's say, disaster-related risk reduction training. And then probably another objective would be you want a manual. You want a procedure manual that is for the chief executive of that community, and also for the community people to be able to have, or setting up, let's say, a social media presence wherein the community people can be able to contribute their knowledge in relation to disaster risk. It's again based on what you take into consideration. And so you also define evaluation metrics. So how do you know that something that the people are capacitated in relation to disaster risk reduction? Maybe you want to, again, how much of the population, how many per sitios do we identify as the incident commander? So those kinds of questions, So what is the timeline that a certain manual should be out, etc. How many earthquake drills do you have to do, or do you just have to follow the quarterly earthquake drills, the tsunami drills, whatever. So again, this could be things that could be counted for evaluation. And of course, in doing so, what would be the activities or the processes that you will do? So you again, map that out, usually in a table. So in order for you to capacitate people, then you have to have trainings. You have to have write-ups for your manuals. You have to procure, build signages. Where do they go when there is already when there's already imminent hazards coming, So where do they run? How do they know, Or do you invest in public warning systems, sirens, etc.? Do you invest in ambulances? Those kinds of things. So what are those projects, programs, and activities that will capacitate them, and also set up a codified procedure of dealing with pre, post, and during disasters, And then you build organizational structures. So maybe you have to improve. You have to set up an incident command system. Who is your incident commander? Who is going to be the marshals when there's fire? So you have to assign people to certain tasks in this particular process. Who is going to be in charge in the barangay council? Who is the councilor in charge, or the kagawad in charge for disaster management? So there has to be and the committees that you will make. So again, organizational structures. And then you have resource management and budgeting. So again, of course, so you need sirens. So how much would the sirens cost? Would you need to get it outside pa of the barangay budget, or how many ambulances do you need? Or do you have an ambulance, or how much would it take, for example, for you to train their kagawad, to go to a particular specialized training. So it also costs something. So you have to appropriate how much for the different activities and the different personnel that you're going to assign, and then detailing the action steps. And also, again, this is just the planning, no? So that later on when you get to the evaluation, this will also be the ways that you will evaluate your work, no? So again, this is just a quick example. I know that you've had a detailed explanation of this in your previous management classes and leadership classes, but basically we follow the same thing in community, although I would say it is also rigid, but in defining these things, it has to be very participatory, and we do not exclude stakeholders, particularly the community people. And imagine, if you're going to do participatory planning, you have to imagine that the workshop to create the vision statement has to be led by a community person. That's the most ideal. So they also have to be trained to kind of run things like this to make it sustainable. So even if you are gone, then they can still continue their visioning, their mission statement, and action planning, even if you're already gone or you're already finished with your work in that particular community. And of course, you have your plan. So how would you implement? So again, the implementation will be based on the dominant type of planning that you use. So if you're using relationship, and then it's relational implementation. No? If you're using traditional planning, then you're using the usual dominant community or locality development planning or implementation. If you're doing advocacy, then your implementation would be social action. And if you're doing participatory planning, then it's popular education and CBPAR actually. CBPAR is another way of doing implementation in relation to participatory planning. So for relational implementation, like I said, it links people to institutional, associational, primary group, family, and individual levels in an ongoing network of mutual care. So again, this is for communities that are generally harmonious, generally having consensus. This is what you do, and then your goal is to be able to help formalize your primary groups your quasi groups into associations to, of course, increase their legal affordances, So relational efforts focus on family, relationship circles, and other primary groups and neighborhoods. They are rooted in home and family rather than the public arena. So this is really more of, helping people, deal with their everyday, and improve their quality of life through connecting people, connecting people who may lack resources with those who can provide them with the resources or the help that they need. And then, of course, we have the locality development or the community development that is particular to traditional planning. So how do we implement? So usually facilitate negotiation among key holders. So for example, this is a disaster risk development. So you have FIVOX, you have the OST, you have the ILG. If it's you have Pag-asa, you also have PNP, Philippine National Police. You have the Bureau of Fire Protection. You have the Coast Guard if you are, in the shorelines. You also include the academe, in the barangay council, and also the municipal council. So you facilitate negotiation among key stakeholders, but usually the stakeholders are not really they're not really generally the community, but these are the ones that are placed as movers based on legal affordances, laws, and policies. Next, you gain public support for large public projects. So you go to people and introduce them to the projects. You may ask their opinions, but again, more weight is coming from the experts and the stakeholders and the actors, no? And then you facilitate problem solving by engaging pre-identified stakeholders, again, not participatory, but, the pre-identified ones with one another and with those of the mezzo. So again, the systems around, the mezzo is the mezzo is the economic and the legal structure in the community, and macro system, national structures of legal systems and politics and culture, who have determined that a given project is needed. So there's an ordinance, we'll do the ordinance. There's a law, we'll do the law, etc. And so the outputs here are policies and programs that are hooked to this mezzo and macro system aspects. And next we have social action. So again, this is rooted on advocacy. So again, what we want to do, we want to empower. We want to empower those who are disempowered, those who are disenfranchised. So how do we empower them? One, by, doing legislative action. So you think of Pura Luca Vega, for instance. There's an issue of disenfranchisement because of their SOGI, right? So one way to help them, for instance, is to help them is to make sure that the SOGI bill is passed. So you lobby the SOGI bill. But again, it's still a far cry to do the SOGI bill yet, no. But what we can do at the moment is to pressure our local government units to craft policies on SOGI bill like ordinances. So, for example, Quezon City has an ordinance related to, LGBTQIA people. Like, for example, they have already, diba, if you are a partner and you're both same sex, you can already make decisions as long as you're a QC resident in a QC hospital. So, there's already ordinance to do that, no? So, that's an example of legislative action. So it's either punishing people for being discriminatory or empowering people who are disenfranchised by probably reparative acts, no? And we've seen that in the States, no, etc. And again, it can also be dispute resolution through mediation or arbitration. So for example, let's go back to the Pura Luca Vega example, or anyone who is being persecuted for being LGBTQ, so you do arbitration, particularly for those who are, who are giving them legal troubles, So if you're a lawyer, you offer that particular arbitration or mediation process, so that this will not turn into a legal issue, no? And then you can do collective bargaining. So this could be, signing petitions, or creating petitions, mass protesting, doing rallies. And then you have non-violent resistance, probably a hunger strike or a noise barrage. So those are non-violent resistance. And then, of course, there are coercive tactics, wherein, there is not really violent, but there is disruption that is really, palpable, and of course, these social actions can lead to revolutions, this can be planned or unplanned, but that's how society works, if you go back to your sociological and social science conversations around stigma, discrimination, out-group, in-group relationships, and how these conflicts can be in history has been, can be resolved using peaceful means, using means that are found in grievance systems, in bureaucratic organizations such as the government, or it can lead to really messy, scary ways like revolutions, and this can really happen. But, of course, usually our goal is not really to escalate it, because we want to be as less nuanced as possible. So if we have an actor in power that to really um, we want to really convince to create a particular policy, and then we hound that particular actor peacefully, as much as we can, yeah. And then we have popular education, and basically this is just what we do in CBPAR and in CEO. So I will not, give this a um, really expansive explanation or discussion. And so, how do we do management in community organizing? So basically, when we organize people in management, we have CEOs, we have, and then vice presidents, we have program directors, program managers, or department managers, and then you have the direct service providers. And the decision making is really top down. The direction of the organization is really led by a few people on the top who have their own visions. Again, these people on the top can be democratic, but again, in a bureaucratic system, that's how it really works. It really is in the charism of the people on top. But in a distributed management, which we usually use when we organize, we organize based on the people's expertise in the community. Again, hindi tayo it's not our expertise within the people. Like for example, area 1 would be committee on women. Again, and area 2 would be, let's say, committee for environmental issues, or this area 3 could be committee for elderly, and then this one is for the committee on, let's say, health, and then the people identify who is going to be a part of those communities. So it is solutions oriented or demand driven based on the demand, of the community. But there's there could be a few people who could be a part of most of these committees. There could be a core group that holds this together, right? But again, the core group also has to come from the community, right? And usually the core group, ideally, we don't get it from the bureaucratic system. So for example, in the context of a barangay, as much as possible, we don't put barangay council or officers in the core group. They are a part of the committees maybe, but they don't lead, because again, we want to equalize the power. And again, we also don't lead as the community organizers. We allow them to lead their own organizations, their own committees, and we allow them to implement their own projects and programs based on a collaboratively identified upon problems and solutions. And so, we plan, and then we implement our plans, and then we manage by setting up an organization that is distributed. And then we monitor, we monitor the things that are being done, and then we evaluate whether it works, and that will be how the plans will be influenced later, And then these plans should be influenced or should be informed by the community participatory research. Okay? And at the heart of it all is the leadership, and the leadership must come from the people. And we'll talk about leadership and empowerment in the next session. So that's the end of our video lecture. So we talked about different types of planning and implementation. And then we talk about different stages of planning. And then we had a short conversation of how management in community organizing is different from formal bureaucratic organizations.